Sometimes, as an illustrator, you make something so absolutely phenomenal that it practically brings a tear to your eye. Then other times, you make something so outrageously terrible that it makes you question all of your life choices. And then, some other times, you make something so middle of the road and average that it just makes you exclaim in an emphatic voice, "Ugh." This was almost one of those pieces, but then I managed to fix it up at the end, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. So let's scrub back in time to when I started this piece on Peach fighting Giga Bowser. I've been playing a lot of the new Super Mario Bros. And Super Smash Bros. On the Switch, and one thing I've realized from those two games is that Peach can fend for herself. So let's make a nice big epic mural of Peach being the badass that she is, taking down a big scary looking Giga Bowser. Let's jump right in. For this piece, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted to do right off the bat. Like, I'd spent all day thinking about the pose I was gonna put Giga Bowser in, and I was gonna have Peach riding on top of him, and obviously I ended up scrapping that idea because this episode's all about them fighting each other. So that was the original idea I'd done, and now, this next thumbnail, I get a bit closer to what I end up doing. I really like the arms that I give Giga Bowser, the kind of pose he has here, but something about it still wasn't quite right. I did like Peach lunging at him like this, but the piece just didn't feel framed very nicely, and it's because his tail was sticking too far out to one side. So I try out a different pose, another one of him coming right at her, and she was gonna be facing him with her back to the audience, but that one didn't feel quite right either. So then finally I went back to this one and I was like, okay, what's wrong with this piece? How can I fix this to be what I really want it to be? And I kind of just realized that Bowser just had his tail facing the wrong way. I needed him kind of engulfing her a little bit and framing her a little bit more nicely. Because if his tail was sticking too far out to the other side where she wasn't, then it would just be a waste of space. This way, it's a much better use of space. I still have a bit too much in the upper left-hand corner, but I remedy that later. Sort of. Ish. You'll see. I just want to step back and re-emphasize the importance of thumbnailing. If I didn't take the time to make a good thumbnail for this piece, I could have spent a lot of time rendering something really terrible that I wouldn't have ended up liking. So please, please make sure if you're going to spend a lot of time on a piece, do a bunch of different thumbnails and really figure out a good composition that you know you're going to be happy with once you spend hours and hours rendering it out. Okay, that's enough for now. Let's jump back into some actual rough drawings. You know, not just thumbnail. You know what I mean. With these roughs, I thought I was gonna do something a little bit different with Giga Bowser, like not just draw pretty much how he looks in the Smash games, but that is kind of what I ended up going with. I didn't really take too much creative liberty with him. I think I made his horns a slightly different shape, but besides that, he's pretty much just classic Giga Bowser. And I had a lot of fun rendering this one out, just because he's a pretty cartoony character, and I draw pretty cartoony, so I got to give him those nice, big, chunky teeth, and his jaw open in a really cool way. Bowser just kind of strikes me as the perfect level of detail in terms of what I like to draw. Like, he's cartoony and has big blocky shapes, but he's also got a bunch of spikes everywhere, and his hair is kind of cool, and he's just a really cool looking guy. And I never really noticed how into Giga Bowser's design I was until I started doing this piece. I more started doing it because I wanted to do a cool image of Peach being tough and awesome. And Giga Bowser was kind of just the obvious choice for hero versus monster where Peach is the hero. But I really ended up having a lot of fun drawing Giga Bowser. I think he ended up being the highlight of this piece more so than her. No offense, Peach. And this is what the roughs kind of looked like when I was done. Okay, this is coming together quite nicely. I'm excited to see how this turns out, so let's jump into inking. Now in the inking stage, I put a lot less detail into Peach. She's a lot smaller than Bowser, so she should be less detailed even though she's kinda the focus of the piece. I gave her a couple little scratchy lines on her face and shirt, and of course the dress is kind of torn up because I wanted it to look a bit like they'd been fighting for a while already. I also didn't give her high heels. I figured, I don't know, maybe she cracked off the heels just before the fight started or something like that. Never worn high heels, but I imagine it's quite hard to fight in them. Anyway, then on to Giga Bowser. I gave him lots more detail because he's big and scary, and I wanted him to look textured and grizzled and rough, so I did just lots of little dashy lines everywhere just to give them a bit of texture, and I made sure to give them lots of scales and just, that's one way I really like to give scaly texture, is just do little sections of 3 scales at a time, just to imply that it's there, and then with color emphasize it a little bit more. I don't like doing a full rendering of scales everywhere, just because it's not really my style to go that detailed. Anyway, I don't have too much else to say about the inking stage, so let's skip on ahead to see what the final inks looked like. Alright, into the flatting. And for the flatting, I'm just gonna power through super speed through this part because I don't find the flattings that interesting to watch when I go back and watch some of my older videos. It's kind of a boring part. It's more interesting to watch the actual cell shading, which we're into now. And for this piece, because it's a bigger piece that I plan on selling as a poster at Comic-Cons and stuff, I did a whole bunch more levels of cell shading than I normally do in say, my Pokemon into Superheroes episode or something like that, where I kind of usually just do a little bit of light, rough shading, then 1 layer of cell shading, 1 layer of lighting, and that's it. This one I did cell shading, then more cell shading, then more cell shading, before all that cell shading I did a layer of rough kind of brushing in with my salty watercolor brush, which is my favorite one, not just because I love the name salty watercolor, I think it's kind of funny, but I think it's a really nice kind of texture that just adds a little bit more that you can't get from just cell shading. Anyway, then I do all the layers of cell shading, and yeah, as I have been doing with a lot of the stuff lately, I'm using that textured inking brush to do the cell shading, just to give things a bit more of a texture. It works especially nice on monsters, but on this one I think it ends up being a bit too rough, and later on I get rid of some of the roughness, and I end up actually erasing big chunks of the shading that I did here, but we'll get into that actually kind of right now. Let's jump ahead to the part where things start going wrong, because you've seen enough of the cell shading to know what's going on here. Let's jump forward a bit. So here is where I started to notice there were going to be problems with this piece, and I wasn't really sure how to fix it at first. So the first thing I tried is the thing that helped me fix my Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse piece, which was throwing in a textured photograph background and messing around with that to see if it would fix the sky, because the sky was a bit too bland and boring. The first texture I threw in there didn't work so well, and then I ended up trying another one that was more of a sunset with red and blue kind of clouds, messed that around a bit, faded it a bit, blurred out some parts and all that, and that ended up working a lot better once I'd kind of added some warping to it and stuff like that. And I also messed around with my rim lighting a lot on Giga Bowser, as even though I often talk about how I do rim lighting that doesn't always make sense, I'd done that here, and it made too much nonsense, if that makes sense. Like, it was kind of just like, where is this red rim lighting coming from? It's often excusable in the stuff that I do, but in this one it was just like, this really doesn't make enough sense for me to have it in there, so I really lowered the opacity of the rim lighting around Giga Bowser's outside later on, and I still like having it there a little bit, but I think it works better with it not too obvious. And then I focus more on lighting the parts of him that would actually be lit in this case. And then another problem I had was just with the actual composition, which is funny because I talked earlier about how it's so important to a thumbnail so that you work out the composition ahead of time, but there was just something about that upper left corner, the clouds there weren't really working for me, and there wasn't enough focus on Peach, so one of the things I did was I added a big light streak behind her, and then I added another sort of cloud in that upper left corner to kind of fill it out a little bit and darken it and try to keep your eyes away from there, because that's kind of an empty space that we don't want to be focusing on. And then I added a bit of rim lighting to the cloud in behind Peach, and luckily I'd lit Bowser in a way where it kind of made sense for a big beam of light to be coming from that direction. And then I did a whole bunch of other stuff. I brought the saturation up on the whole piece because I darkened it out way too much. This is something I've mentioned in my work before that I obviously need to focus on and think about when I'm doing stuff, is I do my flatting way too dark. I'm flatting the characters too dark and then just adding lots of layers of shadow, which makes them more dark. If I'm gonna do most of my lighting and shading work with shadows, then I need to start with brighter flats and more saturated flats, especially for a piece like this that's super cartoony, which most of my work is. But anyway, with all that stuff fixed up, adding the light beam, bringing up the saturation, erasing some of the cell shading to brighten up the characters a bit, we got something that I'm actually pretty happy with. And here it is. And so that concludes the saga of me drawing Peach and Giga Bowser. I hope you all enjoyed. For anyone who is new to the channel, check out the Discord or Facebook group. If you have any original characters you want to submit, the next community episode is all about superheroes. So if you've got an original superhero, submit it in the Discord or Facebook group, or send it to me on Instagram or something, and it might end up redrawn by this guy in an episode on here. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I'm Christian Pearson of Popcross Studios, and I will see you next week or Monday or Wednesday. I'm releasing more videos now. You'll see me soon. Alright, thanks for coming, everybody. Goodbye.